Somewhere in the North Pacific Ocean, a whale has been calling since at least 1989. It calls at a frequency of 52 Hz, a deep, low tone, measurable in fractions of a second on the spectrogram readouts of underwater hydrophones, consistent across decades of recordings. Recognizable to the researchers who have tracked it as immediately and as certainly as a voice is recognizable to the person who knows it. 52 Hz is not, in isolation, an unusual number. It falls within the range of low acoustic frequencies that large whales use for communication. But it is a number that exists in a gap. Blue whales call between 10 and 40 Hz. Fin whales call at around 20 Hz. The frequency of 52 Hz sits above the calling range of every great whale species whose vocalizations have been systematically studied, and below the range of most smaller whales. It is a frequency that no other whale in the recorded acoustic database of the North Pacific has been heard to use. When the hydrophones of the United States Navy's SOS-US network, the sound surveillance system deployed across the Pacific seafloor during the Cold War to detect Soviet submarines, recorded the GU calling pattern of this individual for the first time. The analysts who processed the data noted the anomaly, attempted to identify it against the library of known whale call signatures, and could not. What they were hearing was not a submarine. It was a large whale. It was a whale moving through the North Pacific in the seasonal migration patterns of a healthy baleen whale, covering thousands of kilometers of ocean every year, present in the data year after year. Decade after decade, persistent and consistent and alone in a way that the data itself cannot explain. It was a calling whale that wanted, in the way that all calling whales want, to be heard and to receive a response. And in more than 3 decades of continuous acoustic monitoring across the North Pacific Ocean, no response has ever been recorded. Whatever the 52 Hz whale is, it is calling into an ocean that cannot hear it, in a frequency that sits between the languages of the known world. The acoustic biology of the great whales provides the framework within which the 52 Hz anomaly becomes legible as a genuine scientific puzzle rather than a sentimental observation. Baleen whales, the large filter-feeding whales that include blue, fin, humpback, and minke whales, use low-frequency sound as their primary means of long-distance communication. Sound at these low frequencies travels through the ocean's SOFA channel, the deep acoustic waveguide that carries low-frequency sound around the planet with minimal energy loss, allowing individual whales to communicate across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers of open ocean. The calling frequencies used by different whale species are not arbitrary. They reflect the acoustic properties of the ocean, the physical size of the whale's sound-producing anatomy, and the evolutionary history of the species' communication system. Each species' calling frequency is tuned through evolutionary time to optimize the trade-off between range and information content in the acoustic environment of the ocean the species inhabits. Blue whales call in the range of 10 to 40 Hz because the very low frequency of their calls allows them to travel enormous distances through the SOFA channel. And blue whales occupy a world defined by enormous distances. The North Pacific is vast, blue whales are sparsely distributed across it, and finding a mate requires acoustic communication at ranges that only very low frequencies can achieve. The critical consequence of this acoustic architecture is that whale calls are species-specific. A blue whale calling at 15 Hz is speaking, in acoustic terms, into the space that blue whales inhabit. A fin whale calling at 20 Hz is doing the same. The humpback whale's more complex songs, which change over the course of a breeding season as individuals incorporate new song elements learned from neighbors, function as signals within a population of animals that share the acoustic vocabulary of that song system. The 52 Hz whale is calling at a frequency that no other whale's auditory system is known to be optimized to receive, in a voice whose pitch makes it acoustically invisible to the species whose communication it most closely resembles. This is not a metaphor. It is, to the degree that whale acoustic biology is understood, a physical description of what it means to call at 52 Hz in the North Pacific Ocean. The history of the 52 Hz whales detection begins with the Cold War infrastructure of underwater acoustic surveillance. The SOSUS network, deployed in the Atlantic and Pacific from the 1950s onward, consisted of arrays of hydrophones anchored to the seafloor and connected by undersea cables to shore-based processing stations, where analysts continuously monitored the acoustic signatures of the deep ocean for the engine noises and propeller signatures of Soviet submarines. The network was extraordinarily sensitive, capable of detecting sounds from thousands of kilometers away, and its coverage of the North Pacific was sufficient to track the movements of individual large whales whose calls entered the SOFAR channel. The SOSUS hydrophones had been picking up whale calls for decades before civilian researchers were allowed access to the data, and the biological acoustic record contained within the Cold War surveillance archive turned out to be one of the most valuable unintentional contributions that military technology ever made to the study of marine mammals. After the Cold War ended and the classification level of SOS data was reduced, the network was made available to civilian researchers, including marine biologists, who recognized its extraordinary potential for tracking whale populations across ocean basins. The 52 Hz whale's call was first identified in the SOS data in 1989. And the recording was formally documented in the scientific literature in 2004 by Cornell University researcher William Watkins, who had spent 15 years tracking the individual through the SOS archive. Watkins' paper, published in Deep Sea Research shortly before his death, established the scientific record of the 52 Hz whale, a single individual calling at a consistent and anomalous frequency, whose movement through the North Pacific from late summer through early winter, the seasonal pattern of great whale migration, was consistent with the behavior of a large baleen whale, and whose calls had been detected every year in the SOSUS record since 1989 without significant change in frequency or pattern. The scientific theories about the identity of the 52 Hz whale range from the relatively prosaic to the genuinely extraordinary, and none of them has been definitively confirmed because the whale has never been directly observed. The most widely discussed explanation among cetacean researchers is that the individual is a hybrid, the offspring of a blue whale and a fin whale, two species that are known to hybridize in the wild and whose hybrid offspring have been documented genetically from tissue samples. Bluefin hybrids might, in theory, produce calls at intermediate frequencies between the 15 to 40 Hz of blue whales and the calling frequency patterns associated with fin whales, potentially placing them in the anomalous 52 Hz range. Researchers who favor this explanation point out that hybrid animals sometimes produce vocalizations that are intermediate between the parental species, and that the physical size and seasonal migration pattern of the 52 Hz whale, as reconstructed from the acoustic data, are broadly consistent with an animal of blue or fin whale proportions. A second explanation is that the whale has a physical deformity of the vocal anatomy, a structural abnormality in the sound-producing mechanism that raises the fundamental frequency of its calls above the normal range for its species, in the same way that physical abnormalities can alter the voice of an individual in any vocal species. A third explanation, considered seriously by some researchers, is that the 52 Hz whale belongs to a species or population that simply has not been otherwise documented, an argument supported by the occasional detection of similar anomalous calls at nearby frequencies in the Pacific record, which might indicate that the 52 Hz whale is not unique, but is one of a small and previously unrecognized acoustic population whose members have never been visually identified. What all three of these explanations share is a common absence. They cannot be confirmed without a direct observation of the animal, and in more than 3 decades of tracking its movements through the acoustic data, no such observation has ever been achieved. The loneliness attributed to the 52 Hz whale by the popular culture and journalism that has grown up around the story is a projection, And it is worth being precise about what that projection does and does not reflect. Whales are not known to experience loneliness in the psychological sense that the word carries in human experience. The attribution of loneliness to the 52 Hz whale, the framing of its story as the story of an animal calling forever into an ocean that cannot hear it, is a human narrative imposed on an acoustic fact, and the imposition is so complete and so emotionally resonant that it has become, in public understanding, the primary frame through which the 52 Hz whale is known. Documentary films have been made about it. News articles have described it as the loneliest creature on Earth. Social media has generated millions of interactions around its story, from people who find in its predicament a metaphor for their own experience of communication that does not reach, of calling out and not being heard. The 52 Hz whale has become, in the 20 years since William Watkins' paper made it publicly known, one of the most culturally resonant animals in the world, an animal no one has ever seen, known only through the pattern of a sound on a spectrogram readout, whose story has been absorbed into the emotional vocabulary of human loneliness with a completeness that no actual observation of the animal could easily dislodge. This is worth saying not to dismiss the emotional response, which is genuine and which reflects something real about the nature of isolation and communication. But because the scientific question and the emotional narrative are not the same thing, and conflating them obscures what the 52 Hz whale actually represents as a scientific phenomenon. What is known is this: a large whale in the North Pacific has been calling at an anomalous frequency for more than 35 years, without any other whale's call being detected at a matching frequency in the same acoustic region. Whether this constitutes suffering or loneliness or simply a different mode of acoustic existence is not something the acoustic data can determine. The whale continues to call. The calls continue to be recorded. The pattern of its migrations continues to follow the seasonal patterns of a healthy baleen whale, traveling thousands of kilometers each year in the regular north-south movements that characterize the great whale migrations of the North Pacific. Whatever the 52 Hz whale is, it does not appear from the available data to be dying. It is doing what whales do. It is calling and moving and calling again in a voice that the ocean has not answered. The attempts to find the 52 Hz whale to transition from acoustic detection to direct visual observation illustrate both the extraordinary difficulty of locating individual whales in the open ocean and the particular challenges posed by a whale whose calling behavior provides directional information about its location, but whose visual identification requires approaching close enough to observe its physical characteristics. Acoustic triangulation from the SOS network can locate the whale to within a broad area of the North Pacific, a region that may cover thousands of square kilometers of open ocean, and its seasonal movement patterns have been mapped through years of tracking. The whale appears to move northward in spring and southward in autumn, following a migration route through the northeastern Pacific that overlaps with the ranges of both blue and fin whales, which is itself consistent with the hybrid hypothesis and inconsistent with an entirely unknown species. But the ocean is large. The whale's exact location at any given time is not precisely known, and visual identification requires being in the right place at the right time with the right observation platform, a research vessel capable of sustaining weeks at sea in open Pacific conditions, equipped with acoustic monitoring equipment capable of tracking the whale's calls in real time, and crewed by scientists prepared to search a vast area for an animal that, even when its acoustic location is roughly known, may be submerged and invisible at the surface. In 2015, a filmmaker and marine biologist named Roger Desprez organized what was described as the first dedicated expedition to find the 52 Hz whale, deploying a small vessel in the North Pacific with acoustic monitoring equipment to track the whale's calls and attempt to intercept its course. The expedition did not locate the whale visually, but it generated renewed scientific and public interest in the case and demonstrated that directed search efforts based on acoustic tracking were at least theoretically possible. No subsequent expedition has succeeded in achieving a confirmed visual identification of the individual that has been acoustically tracked since 1989. The most recent acoustic data from the North Pacific, extending into the early 2020s, continues to record calls consistent with the 52 Hz signature, though the frequency of the calls has shown a gradual downward shift over the decades of the record, moving from 52 Hz in the earliest recordings towards slightly lower frequencies in more recent data. This frequency shift is not unique to the 52 Hz whale. Researchers studying the calls of blue whale populations across the world's oceans have documented a consistent long-term decrease in calling frequency across all populations, a trend that has been attributed to the recovery of whale populations from commercial whaling, the increasing acoustic competition in the ocean from shipping noise, and possibly the changing acoustic properties of the ocean as its temperature and chemistry are affected by climate change. The fact that the 52 Hz whale's calls show a similar downward shift suggests that the whale's vocal anatomy responds to the same pressures as those of other blue or blue-related whale individuals, which in turn is consistent with the hypothesis that the whale is a blue whale or a blue whale hybrid rather than a member of an entirely separate species. But the frequency shift is small, and the calls remain anomalous, and the question of what is producing them remains, more than 35 years after the first recording, unanswered. What the 52 Hz whale represents, in the end, is not merely a scientific mystery about an unidentified individual in the North Pacific. It represents the limit of what acoustic detection alone can tell us about an ocean whose interior remains, despite our best instruments, incompletely known. We can hear it, we can track its movements, we can map the shape of its migrations across decades of data. We cannot see it, we cannot identify it. We cannot know whether it has ever encountered another of its kind, whether the frequency of its calls has ever been met with a response from a direction that the SOS array was not monitoring, whether the ocean has answers for it that our instruments have simply missed. The 52 Hz whale is still out there. It is still calling, and the North Pacific is still very large and very deep, and its waters have kept for 3.5 decades the secret of what is moving through them, calling in a voice that sits between the languages of the known world, patient and consistent, traveling the same ocean it has always traveled, carrying the same voice it has always carried, asking the same question it has always asked. And the ocean, which is large enough to contain the question without ever being required to answer it, simply carries the sound forward through the SOFAR channel, from hydrophone to hydrophone, from year to year, into the archive of an acoustic record that grows longer with every season and that documents, with the precision of scientific measurement, everything about this whale except the one thing that would resolve the question of what it is.